The Winter Apothecary's Cabinet, a rhythmic sleep story of healing and rest. The snow began just after dusk, the way it often does in January, quietly, without announcement, as though the sky had simply decided it was time. Standing at the kitchen window, I watched the first flakes drift past the glass, illuminated briefly by the porch light, before disappearing into the gathering darkness beyond. They fell with that particular slowness that promises accumulation, the kind of snow that doesn't stop after an hour, but settles in for the night, transforming the world into something softer, something hushed. I had checked the weather forecast that morning over coffee, seen the predictions of 6 to 8 inches, and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not the worry about driving or the inconvenience of being snowed in, but a genuine, quiet relief that I would have no choice but to stay home. No errands that couldn't wait. No obligations that couldn't be postponed. Just a house, the warmth radiating from the old cast-iron radiators. And finally, the time to do something I had been putting off for months. The herbs needed organizing. I turned away from the window and looked at the shelf above the counter, the one I passed a dozen times a day without really seeing anymore. It was cluttered with crinkly paper bags, some folded neatly at the top, others barely closed, their contents threatening to spill. They were stuffed into a wide wicker basket that had long ago lost its shape, bulging at the sides. A few bags had torn, and I could see the dried leaves inside chamomile, maybe, or lemon balm. The labels, written in my own handwriting at various times over the past 2 years, had faded to near illegibility. Some bags had no labels at all. There was a faint herbal smell emanating from the shelf, but it was muddled, all the scents mixing together into something generic and slightly dusty. It made me feel a small, familiar pang of guilt. These herbs had been gathered with care. I had grown some of them myself in the raised beds out back, tending them through the summer heat, watering them in the early morning when the air was still cool. Others I had foraged on long walks through the woods at the edge of town, kneeling in clearings to snip wild chamomile, identifying plants with the help of my worn field guide, feeling that particular satisfaction of finding something useful and beautiful growing wild. And then I had dried them. I had hung bundles from the rafters in the laundry room, tied with kitchen twine, checking them every few days until they were crisp and ready. I had spread some on screens in the attic, where the air was warm and dry. I had done all of this with intention, with the idea that I was caring for myself, that I was preparing medicine for the times when I would need it. And then I had shoved them into paper bags and forgotten about them. Not completely forgotten, of course. I used them occasionally, making a cup of tea when I couldn't sleep or when my stomach was uneasy. But I never really tended to them. I never organized them properly. They sat there on that shelf, a testament to good intentions left unfinished, and every time I glanced at them, I felt that small pinch of guilt. But tonight, I thought, watching the snow fall more steadily now, tonight that changes. Tonight was about tending to myself in the same way I tended to the garden in summer, not with grand gestures or elaborate rituals, but with simple, practical care. Because self-care, I had learned, isn't always a bath by candlelight, or a face mask or a meditation app. Sometimes self-care is just putting your life in order, one small task at a time. Sometimes it's about creating systems that support you, spaces that feel calm, routines that remind you that you're worth the effort. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, not for tea yet, but just for the comfort of having hot water ready. Then I pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table, taking a moment to simply be still. Outside, the snow was already beginning to accumulate on the railing of the back deck, a thin white line that would grow thicker as the night went on. Inside, the house was warm and quiet, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders drop, feeling the tension I had been carrying for days, maybe weeks, begin to loosen. There was nowhere I needed to be, nothing I needed to do except this one thing, this small act of care. I poured myself a glass of water, added a thin slice of lemon, and sipped it slowly, feeling the cold travel down my throat. Then I stood up and began to gather my supplies. The amber glass jars were stored in the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one I had to use as step stool to reach. I had bought them months ago, maybe even a year ago, from an online shop that specialized in apothecary supplies. They were beautiful thick glass in a warm amber color that would protect the herbs from light, with wide mouths that would make filling them easy, and tight-fitting glass lids that sealed with a satisfying firmness. I had bought a dozen of them in various sizes, imagining this exact moment, this exact ritual. And then I had put them away and forgotten about them, too. Now I lifted them down carefully, one at a time, and lined them up on the counter. Even empty, they were lovely, catching the light from the overhead fixture and glowing softly. I filled the sink with hot, soapy water and washed each one, even though they were already clean, because the ritual of washing felt important. I wanted to start fresh, to do this right. While the jars dried on a clean linen towel spread across the counter, I gathered the rest of my supplies. A small brass scoop I had found at an antique shop, tarnished but sturdy, perfect for measuring. A plastic funnel, wide-mouthed and practical. A stack of cream-colored labels, the kind with a little border and space for writing. My fountain pen, a gift from a friend years ago, with deep blue ink that flowed smoothly and made even my ordinary handwriting look elegant. And finally, a notebook, a small one with a green linen cover, where I would record what went into each jar, the date, and any notes about the blends I created. I spread the linen towel across the kitchen table to protect the wood and arranged everything within easy reach. The jars, still faintly warm from washing, the scoop and funnel, the labels and pen, the notebook opened to a fresh page. It looked like the setup for a small ceremony, which I realized it was. I poured myself another glass of water and sat down, looking at the empty jars and the basket of crinkly bags waiting on the counter. I felt my breathing slow, felt a kind of meditative calm settle over me. There was something deeply satisfying about preparation, about setting up the tools and the space before beginning the work. It reminded me that real healing, isn't always in the remedy itself, but in the care with which the remedy is prepared, in the attention paid, in the intention held. I reached for the basket and pulled it toward me, setting it on the table. Then I began. The first bag I pulled out was labeled Chamomile August. The paper was soft and slightly yellowed, and when I opened it, the scent that rose up was immediately recognizable. Sweet, apple-like, warm. I had grown this chamomile myself in a sunny corner of the garden where it had sprawled and bloomed prolifically, tiny white flowers with yellow centers nodding on thin stems. I had picked the flowers in the morning when the essential oils were strongest and had dried them slowly, carefully, until they were crisp and light. I selected one of the medium-sized jars and placed the funnel in its mouth. Then, using the brass scoop, I began to transfer the chamomile from the paper bag to the jar. The flowers were so light they barely seemed to have weight at all, and they made a soft, dry rustling sound as they poured through the funnel, a sound like autumn leaves being shuffled by a gentle wind or tissue paper being crumpled slowly. It was a soothing sound, rhythmic and repetitive. I worked slowly, scooping and pouring, watching the jar fill gradually. The chamomile settled into the amber glass, and the color was beautiful pale golden white against the warm brown of the jar. When it was full, I removed the funnel, pressed the glass lid down firmly, and heard the satisfying clink of glass meeting glass, sealing the contents inside. I held the jar up to the light and felt a small swell of satisfaction. It looked like something from an old apothecary, something carefully tended and properly stored. It looked like medicine. Setting it aside, I reached for the next bag, lavender. This one I had foraged from a small farm at the edge of town that allowed people to cut their own for a small fee. I had gone on a hot afternoon in July, wandering between the rows of purple, breathing in the clean, slightly sharp scent that seemed to clear my head and calm my thoughts simultaneously. I had cut armfuls of it, far more than I needed, and had carried it home in a basket, feeling the bees' hum still echoing in my ears. I opened the bag, and the scent intensified herbaceous floral with that distinctive lavender bite that's almost medicinal. The buds were still beautifully purple, still intact on their stems, and I was glad I had stripped them carefully during the drying process, so they would be ready to use. Another jar, another round of scooping and pouring. The lavender made a different sound than the chamomile, a drier, more substantial rustle, the buds harder and more defined. They filled the jar more slowly, settling densely, and when I sealed the lid, I felt that same clink, that same small note of completion. I sat back for a moment looking at the two jars side by side, chamomile and lavender, the herbs of sleep and peace, the ones I reached for most often when the world felt too loud or my thoughts too insistent. I thought about how often I had denied myself rest over the years, how I had pushed through exhaustion, telling myself I didn't have time to be tired, that there was too much to do, that sleep could wait. How I had worn my sleeplessness like a badge of honor, proof that I was productive, committed, responsible. It had taken me a long time to learn that rest is not a luxury. Rest is medicine. Rest is not something you earn after you've done enough. Rest is what allows you to do anything at all. These jars sitting here on my kitchen table on a snowy January night were a promise to myself. I will rest. I will give myself permission to be tired. I will not apologize for needing sleep. I reached for the next bag, and this time I pulled out something heavier, denser. The label read, Dandelion Root September. I remember digging these kneeling in the backyard with a small spade, carefully excavating the long taproots of dandelions I had been nurturing all summer, letting them grow large and strong before harvesting. I had scrubbed them clean, chopped them into small pieces, and dried them slowly in a low oven until they were hard and brittle and deeply brown. Dandelion root smells like earth and bitterness, like something ancient and medicinal. It's not a gentle scent, not sweet or floral. It's the smell of the ground, of minerals, of things that grow in darkness before pushing up toward light. I liked it, though liked its honesty, its lack of pretense. I spooned the root pieces into a jar, and they made a different sound entirely harder, almost like small pebbles or dried beans, a rattling, settling sound. They had weight to them, substance. They filled the jar slowly, compactly, and when I pressed the lid on, the jar felt heavier in my hands. Next came burdock root, which I had bought from an herbalist because it didn't grow wild in my area. It had the same earthy quality as the dandelion, but with a slightly sweeter undertone, almost woody. Then valerian root, which smelled strange, musty, and almost unpleasant, but which I knew was powerful for sleep, one of the strongest herbal sedatives. I wrinkled my nose a little as I transferred it, working quickly, but I was glad to have it. Glad to have it properly stored and labeled so I would know exactly where it was on the nights when nothing else would do. There was something deeply satisfying about working with the roots. They required a firmer hand, a steadier scoop. They didn't drift or float. They settled solidly, heavily. Chamomile and lavender were gentle, soothing, the herbs of comfort and ease. But roots were about grounding, about anchoring, about the tough, bitter work of real healing. Because healing, I had learned, isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's about digging deep, about facing the bitterness, about doing the work, even when it's not pretty or pleasant. Sometimes self-love isn't soft. Sometimes it's the hard choice to do what you actually need rather than what feels easy. It's getting up and making the tea even when you'd rather stay in bed scrolling your phone. It's organizing the herbs even when it would be easier to leave them in their crinkly bags. It's tending to yourself even when no one is watching, even when there's no external reward, simply because you've decided that you are worth the effort. I lined up the root jars next to the flower jars, and there was something aesthetically pleasing about the arrangement. The light and the dark, the gentle and the strong, all of it necessary, all of it part of the same practice of care. I was reaching for another bag when my hand brushed against something unexpected, tucked behind the others in the basket. It was a jar, not a bag, an old jar with a metal screw-top lid, covered in a thin layer of dust. I pulled it out and wiped the dust away with my thumb, squinting at the handwritten label. Energy and vitality blend, it read, in handwriting that was recognizably mine, but somehow younger, more optimistic. There was a date, 5 years ago, almost to the month. I had no memory of making this blend, no memory of what I had been thinking, what I had been trying to fix or improve about myself. But I could guess. 5 years ago, I had been in a different place, living in a smaller apartment in a bigger city, working a job that demanded everything from me and gave back very little. I had been tired all the time, but it was the kind of tired that you try to push through rather than surrender to. I had probably made this blend thinking it would help me be more energized, more productive, more capable of meeting the endless demands on my time and attention. Curious, I unscrewed the lid and looked inside. The contents had degraded into a fine grayish powder, and when I brought the jar to my nose and sniffed cautiously, it smelled like nothing, or maybe like dust and regret. Whatever herbs I had mixed together, ginseng, probably, or green tea, or maybe just wishful thinking ground into powder, they had long ago lost any potency they might have had. I laughed. It was a soft laugh, quiet in the warm kitchen, but it was genuine. I stood up, walked to the compost bin, and dumped the entire contents inside, then rinsed the jar and set it in the sink. 5 years ago, I had thought I needed energy and vitality. I had thought the problem was that I wasn't doing enough, wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't sufficiently optimized or productive or on. I had thought I needed to fix my tiredness rather than honor it. Now I would much rather have a deep sleep and nap blend. Now I understood that the real vitality comes from rest, from listening to your body, from giving yourself permission to be tired without judgment. There was wisdom in knowing what you actually need, not what you think you should need, not what productivity culture tells you to need, but what you truly, deeply need. Self-love, I thought, rinsing out the empty jar, is giving yourself permission to change. Permission to want different things now than you wanted 5 years ago. Permission to be tired, to slow down, to value rest over productivity. Permission to nap without guilt. I dried the jar and set it aside. Maybe I would use it for something else, or maybe I would donate it. Either way, it had served its purpose, reminding me of how far I had come, how much I had learned about taking care of myself. I returned to the table and looked at what remained in the basket. Chamomile for its gentle sedative properties and its ability to calm the nervous system, 3 scoops. Lavender for reducing anxiety and promoting relaxation, 2 scoops. Passion flower, which I had bought dried because it didn't grow in my climate, for quieting the mind and easing the transition into sleep, 1 scoop. Together they looked like a jar of potpourri, but I knew they were so much more than decorative. I sealed the jar and held it up, giving it a gentle shake to mix everything one more time. Then I wrote in the notebook, sleep and dreams blend chamomile, lavender, passion flower, rose, for when the world is too loud and the night feels too long. 2 teaspoons in hot water, steep 10 minutes, drink slowly. The next blend came together even more quickly. I had been struggling with digestion lately, nothing serious, just the minor discomforts that come from stress and irregular eating and too much coffee. I knew exactly what I needed. Peppermint, cooling and carminative, soothing to the stomach, 2 scoops. Fennel seed, which I crushed lightly with a mortar and pestle to release the oils, sweet and warming. An immune support, blend with elderberry, echinacea, and rose hips. A stress relief blend that was mostly lemon balm and holy basil, with a touch of lavender for good measure. Each time I created a blend, I felt that same sense of quiet satisfaction, the same feeling of competence and care. There was magic in this, I thought, not supernatural magic, but the deeper magic of knowing yourself well enough to know exactly what you need. Not what a book tells you, not what a doctor prescribes, though those have their place, but what you know from experience, from attention, from the simple practice of paying attention to your own body and learning to trust it. This was self-love in its most practical form. Not affirmations or bubble baths, though those were fine too, but the real daily work of becoming your own healer, your own caretaker, your own most reliable source of comfort. The ritual was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Scoop and pour, mix and seal, write and record. My hands moved with increasing confidence, measuring by eye now rather than counting scoops, trusting my instincts about proportions and combinations. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, filled with the mingled scents of all the herbs I was working with, and outside the snow continued to fall, steady and quiet, accumulating on the deck and the bare branches of the trees. When all the blends were made and all the individual herbs were transferred to jars, I turned my attention to the labels. This was the part I had been looking forward to most, the small act of naming that would make everything official, permanent. I pulled the stack of cream-colored labels toward me and uncapped my fountain pen, feeling the familiar weight of it in my hand. I had always loved fountain pens, the way the ink flowed smoothly onto paper, the way the nib made a small scratching sound as it moved, the way it forced you to slow down and write carefully, because you could not just scribble quickly and thoughtlessly. I started with the individual herbs, the single-ingredient jars. For each one, I wrote the name of the herb, the date I was jarring it, and the source, whether I had grown it, foraged it, or bought it. Chamomile, January 2026 homegrown. Lavender, January 2026 foraged. Dandelion root, January 2026 homegrown. The pen made that satisfying scratch-scratch sound against the paper, and I found myself smiling as I worked, enjoying the small ritual of it. For the blends, I wrote more. The name of the blend, of course, and the date, but also a brief note about when to use it, what it was for. These notes weren't just practical. They were also a kind of permission, a reminder to myself that it was okay to need these things. On the Sleep and Dreams jar, I wrote, "For when the world is too loud and you need to be held by sleep." On the Digestive Ease jar, for when your stomach is uneasy and you need something gentle. On the Stress Relief jar, for when everything feels like too much and you need to remember how to breathe. There was power in naming things, I realized as I worked. By labeling these jars, I was also naming my own needs, my own vulnerabilities, my own humanness. I was acknowledging that I needed help, sometimes help to sleep, help to calm down, help to feel grounded. And there was no shame in that. There was only honesty and care and the quiet courage of admitting what was true. When all the labels were written and carefully affixed to the jars centered and straight, because I was particular about such things, I sat back and looked at my work. The table was covered with jars now, 15 of them in total, all different sizes, all glowing amber in the soft light of the kitchen. They looked like something from another era, from a time when medicine was made at home and healing was personal, and people knew the names of plants and trusted their own hands. I felt a deep satisfaction looking at them, but it wasn't the satisfaction of accomplishment, of checking something off a list. It was the satisfaction of care, of having tended to something that mattered, of having created order and beauty out of neglect and clutter. But I wasn't quite finished. There was one more thing I wanted to do. I selected the Sleep and Dreams blend and measured a spoonful into a small ceramic teapot, one I had bought years ago at a craft fair and loved for its simple, elegant shape. I filled the kettle again and waited for it to boil, listening to the gradual crescendo of heat, the building whistle that would signal it was ready. When the water was boiling, I poured it carefully over the herbs in the teapot and watched as they immediately began to release their color and fragrance into the water. The liquid turned a pale golden green, and steam rose from the spout, curling upward in soft, shifting patterns. I set a timer for 10 minutes and returned to the table, rearranging the jars into a pleasing configuration while I waited. When the timer chimed, I poured the tea through a small strainer into my favorite mug, a ceramic one, smooth and substantial, with a glaze that was deep blue and slightly uneven, showing the hand of the potter who made it. The tea was the color of pale honey, and it steamed gently, releasing that complex, layered scent: chamomile's sweetness, lavender's sharpness, the subtle floral note of rose, all of it mingling together into something that smelled like comfort itself. I brought the mug to my face and closed my eyes, breathing deeply. The steam rose against my skin, warm and moist, carrying the scent directly into my nose, into my lungs, into someplace deeper that wasn't quite physical. I felt my shoulders drop another inch, felt my jaw unclench, felt something tight in my chest begin slowly to soften. This was the moment. This was the cure. Not the tea itself, though the tea was good, would be helpful, would ease me towards sleep in a few hours when I finally went to bed. But the real cure was this, the act of making it, the permission to be still, the kindness of knowing exactly what I needed and giving it to myself. Healing, I thought, taking the first sip and feeling the warmth spread from my mouth to my throat to my chest. Healing isn't always about fixing. Sometimes it's just about being gentle. Sometimes it is about the steam from a cup of tea rising into your face and smelling like peppermint and peace. Sometimes it's about organizing your herbs on a snowy night because you've decided, finally, that you are worth the effort of care. I carried the mug to the counter and began to arrange the jars on the shelf that I had cleared earlier. I placed them carefully, thoughtfully, organizing them by type flowers on the left, roots in the middle, blends on the right. They looked beautiful lined up there, glowing in their amber glass, each one labeled in my careful handwriting, each one holding medicine I had made with my own hands. The crinkly paper bags were gone now, folded and tucked into the recycling. The wicker basket was empty and restored to its proper shape. The table was clear, except for my notebook and pen, which I would put away in a moment. The tools were washed and drying in the dish rack. Everything was in its place. Everything was tended. Everything was cared for. I returned to the table with my tea and sat down, looking at the jars on the shelf, listening to the snow outside, feeling the warmth of the house around me. There was a deep, bone-level satisfaction in this moment, not from accomplishment, but from care, not from productivity, but from presence. I had tended to myself the way I would tend to a garden, with patience and attention and the understanding that growth and healing take time, take repetition, take showing up even when the work is small and unglamorous. Tomorrow the world would ask things of me. There would be emails to answer and decisions to make and responsibilities to meet. But tonight I had everything I needed. I had the warmth of the house and the quiet of the snow and a cup of tea made from herbs I had grown and dried and blended myself. I had a shelf of beautiful jars, each one a small promise that I would continue to care for myself, that I would continue to tend to my needs with gentleness and respect. I sipped the tea slowly, letting it cool just enough to drink comfortably, feeling it warm me from the inside. The chamomile was there, sweet and soothing. The lavender was there, clean and calming. The rose was there, adding a subtle floral note that made the whole thing feel special, like something made with love rather than just necessity. And it was made with love, I realized, self-love, the kind that isn't glamorous or Instagram-worthy, the kind that happens in quiet kitchens on snowy nights, the kind that looks like organizing herbs and writing labels and making tea for yourself when no one else is around to see or praise or validate the effort. This was the kind of self-love that sustained, the kind that lasted, the kind that actually healed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the world grew quieter and whiter and softer. Inside, I finished my tea and rinsed the mug, dried it, and put it away. I turned off the overhead light, leaving only the small lamp on the counter burning, casting a warm glow over the jars on the shelf. They seemed to glow back, holding their medicine, holding their promise. I stood there for a moment longer, just looking, just being, feeling grateful, feeling tended, feeling finally at peace. Tomorrow I would wake up and make breakfast, and probably drink too much coffee, and face whatever the day brought. But I would face it knowing that this shelf was here, that these jars were here, that I had created something to sustain me, that I had remembered on this quiet January night how to care for myself in the most fundamental way, by knowing what I needed and giving it to myself without apology, without guilt, without waiting for permission from anyone else. The house creaked gently as old houses do, settling into the cold night. The radiator hissed softly. The snow whispered against the windows, and I stood in my warm kitchen, surrounded by amber jars and the lingering scent of herbs, and felt more at home in my own life than I had in a very long time. Self-love, I thought one more time, is knowing exactly what you need to heal. And sometimes the cure isn't a grand gesture or an expensive remedy or a complicated protocol. Sometimes the cure is just a warm cup of tea and the permission to be still. Sometimes it is a shelf of amber jars and the memory of an evening spent tending to yourself with care. Sometimes it's as simple as knowing that you are your own best caretaker, and then proving it to yourself, one small ritual at a time. I turned off the lamp and walked toward the stairs, ready for sleep, carrying with me the warmth of the tea and the satisfaction of the evening and the knowledge that tomorrow, if I needed it, the herbs would be there, organized and labeled and ready, waiting on the shelf like old friends who knew exactly how to help. The snow fell, the house was warm, and I was finally exactly where I needed to be. If this story resonated with you, please consider showing your support with a like and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys.